Welcome to the Comm Cafe with your host, Dwayne Richards. In today's episode, I'm interviewing Jason Reid. Jason is a professional speaker, award-winning journalist, the co-host of Speaking for Profit podcast, and the founder of Power Story Master. Before we get started today, remember you can learn more about our company, Communications for Results, at our website, Comm for Results. That's COMM, the number 4, results.com. Now, let's sit back and listen to my interview with Jason Reid. Welcome to Comm Cafe. I am your host, Dwayne Richards, and today I have another special guest, Jason Reid. And I did a little bit of research on Jason before he's getting on here, and I found out that Jason and I have actually been Facebook friends since July of 2013. Back in Port Credit at the Entrepreneurs of Port Credit was where I'm pretty sure I don't usually, sometimes I ask people where we met, but I did my own research, so I'm going to tell Jason that's where we met. That way there's no his story or my story, but and Jason, I'm going to share a little bit more, and then I'm going to put your bio on the show notes, so I know that you can share a little bit, because I know your bio is long. Not a bad thing, but you've done a lot of really interesting things. And right off the hop, I want to thank you for joining me today, and welcome to the Comm Cafe.
I'm so excited to be here. This is a blast.
It is fun. Like we said, we chugged through about 20 minutes before we even hit the record button. So
it's true. I was thinking, hopefully we don't take all the good stuff and
I know.
Leave it out.
I was talking about that yesterday when I did my last podcast, episode 13 with Joan. And I said, it's like, I listened to I'm not sure what you listen to on the radio. I listen to a lot of the Fan 590 and Bob McCowan and John Shannon, and they always come on and they say, wow, that was a fantastic conversation we just had. And I'm sure that we miss out, as listeners, we miss out on like half the stuff, and maybe half the stuff they can't actually air because of what they talk about. But it's the cool thing we just talked about is you're also a podcaster. You have your own podcast. That the cool thing is having our own podcast. It's our show. We get to run it, and maybe share a little. Well, jump in. We'll change a little bit of the agenda, but share a little bit of who you are and how come your podcast is so polished. And you reminded me about your background, about why you're so smooth. Not smooth, but you're really polished in your podcast.
Well, thanks, Dwayne. For people who don't know me, my company is called Power Story Master. Basically, what I do in my company is I help entrepreneurs create messages. I help them with creating speak to sell talks, and also creating stories that really help sell and promote them. And one of the reasons why I'm good at doing that is I've got a very long background in television journalism. So I was a TV news writer. I was a show producer. I was head of news and information at the Weather Network, interesting of all places. And even before that, I was doing, I'd written some screenplays for Hollywood. Unfortunately, never became rich and famous for that. Did a little bit of comedy. So it's really fun being able to take all this creative stuff that I've done previously when I've been employed by other people and, turning that into my own business. So one of the things that I decided to do as well, because I'm also a professional speaker, is create a podcast for speakers and for entrepreneurs that speak. And that podcast is called the Speaking for Profit podcast, which I host with my co-host, Cindy Ashton, who's also a Torontonian who's living now in the U.S. And it has been an absolute blast. We've really enjoyed doing the podcast. And one of the reasons is the ability to build relationships, with other speakers, with other people in the industry. We'll go out, we'll see somebody, we'll be really excited having seen somebody on the stage, and then we can ask them, hey, you know what, we'd love to interview you, find out, what it is kind of that makes you tick as a speaker, and what things you love about the craft, and even some good stories about life on the road or on stage. And it really is a fantastic opportunity for us to, bond with other people in the industry and build relationships with them, which ultimately, can grow your business as well.
That is fantastic. I'm just writing a couple of notes because I'm learning to, as I was saying on the last podcast, I'm learning to be a better listener as well as when asking the questions is listening, and then figuring out while I'm listening, figure out what that next question is based on some of the answers that you gave. So I know you just had your first anniversary. So you guys have been podcasting for 12 months now, and I was just listening. Is it episode? What are we at? 20? Was it 24?
24, yes.
24. And I know we talked a little bit about not jumping into crazy, like overcommitting. So you've had 24. Have you had 24 guests? Has every episode been a guest, or some just you and Cindy?
No. So, here was the big challenge between Cindy and myself. We both have fairly busy schedules. So I was the original creator and producer. But, when we got talking about the show and how often we should do it, weekly just seemed a little too much for us. But then we worried if we were only doing one a month, then that would be just 12 episodes a year, and it wouldn't be enough likely to get traction and get people in the habit of listening to us. So what we did was we decided on a launch schedule of 2 episodes a month. And there was, I think we launched with like 4 or 5 episodes at the beginning, so people could, if they, logged on for the first time, there would be, some episodes there for them to listen to. So we started, like I said, I think with 4 or 5 episodes, and then a few months ago, things became really busy, so we decided for a couple months to scale it back to a 1 month. Once a month thing, and then once those projects were over, we're now back to 2 a month. So it ended up evening out that we did 24 episodes over 12 months. So that was basically two per month, and we're finding that's a schedule that allows people to again be in the habit of checking the episodes, of downloading them, of listening to them, and it's not too overly onerous on our schedule either.
And as a point, not too owners on the listener too, because some of the ones I follow, I'm like, man, I got to find more time in the day. Like, do I just put it on while I sleep? And it's like some people are cranking out a lot of content, and then you fall behind, and then as a result, you get sort of overwhelmed and potentially unsubscribe because it's just too overwhelming. So
yeah, and to speak to the other question you asked as well, which I forgot to answer, the other thing that we looked at, because having guests are wonderful, but it can sometimes be time consuming because you have to contact the people, find out a good time if they're willing to do it. We make sure that there's a system in place and that there's agreement signed and all that sort of stuff. So it takes a little bit more time than doing an episode where it's just Cindy and I. So what we decided to do was for every 3 episodes, we'd have 2 episodes where we'd have guests in, and 1 episode where Cindy and I would just basically discuss a specific topic. And the nice thing about that is it allows you to sort of bring in your own personality a little bit more, show off your own expertise, because if you're using a podcast to promote your business and to, promote your expertise, if all people are hearing are guests and they don't hear, your wisdom, then it's kind of self-defeating. So we wanted a little bit of balance there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good tip. And I think what you said something right at the beginning during that we are introducing to people that that came to our workshop, our first 2 workshops about helping people launch podcasts. So we didn't help you. You were ahead of the game on us. But we tell people, that 4 to 5 episodes, because one of the things I heard the other day was that we are in the binge watching and binge listening mentality now. That with Netflix and podcasting and live, stream on demand, that if I start watching something or start listening to something, I want to listen to multiple episodes probably right at the beginning. So by having that 4 to 5 episodes ready to go, people can get into it right from the start, where if they wait another month for episode 2, they may not come back. So.
That's right. And I can attest to the fact that people do binge listen or at least binge download, because when I check my stats, sometimes you'll notice suddenly 60 or 70 episodes being downloaded in an hour. And then when you go and look at them, you realize that it's actually maybe 3 or 4 people, but they've, once they've downloaded one episode and they like it, they download every other episode. So suddenly you have a whole bunch of downloads, but it's just a couple people who are going to binge listen to them.
Interesting. Now you piqued my ears there when I heard, because you hit on one of the things that we talk about, which is results. Our company, communications for results is not just communications; it's communications for results. And you hit the nail on the head that with your you're not just podcasting, but you're going into behind the scenes to look at what the numbers are and what some of the analytics are. Not to get overwhelmed by analytics, but to see I'm guessing you're looking to see what's working and what worked or what didn't work, or maybe to share one or two things that you're looking at when you're looking in the behind the scenes on the podcast numbers.
Yeah. So with the numbers, one of the things we can get from the numbers is an indication, if we have a guest on, how popular that guest is. So some guests have, very strong mailing lists. And it's interesting because we've actually had guests that had strong mailing lists of a lot of people, and they included the podcast in their newsletter. And, sometimes you get like a lot of listeners from that, and then sometimes you don't. And, it's kind of interesting to see the popularity of the topic, which is another thing. And sometimes just really how you arrange the show can have a big difference in how popular it is. For instance, Cindy and I recently started doing what we call top 5 episodes. So, we wanted to sort of shake things up. So we did, the first thing was like basically the top 5 places to get speaking leads. And then we did top 5 speak to sell mistakes. And what I found by looking at the analytics is those episodes are really popular. So now that we know that our audience likes those type of episodes, we can design more of those.
Thank you for that one. You know what? I gotta share a little secret with you. What I'm discovering with both live video and now with podcasting, I've done a fair number, not a lot, a few of the Facebook lives and interviewing my friends and colleagues, and now with podcasting. And it's a great way to, as they say, network up.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
Figure out who's doing what you're already doing, or who's doing what you want to do. Offer to interview them. And my secret is I'm getting free coaching.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. And with the podcast that we're doing, I mean, we've got not only seasoned speakers, but also people from comedy backgrounds and music backgrounds and other performing backgrounds, because I've always been fascinated by how, when you're on stage, even if you're just an entrepreneur, knowing the tricks of all of those trades can really help you come across well to an audience and influence an audience, be able to entertain an audience. So particularly for those people who come in with a different background than I have, it's a great way to find out, what they feel is really important to their performance. And it gives me an idea of, what I can work on, or things that I, might realize, I never thought of consciously thinking about that, which, maybe it's improv, doing more improvisation in my talks, or maybe it's has more to do with, the way I interact with the audience, because I'm just getting these ideas from these different performers. And I find it really interesting. And it's just a great way to learn, because it's not only me who's learning that, but then I'm sending it out to all of these listeners, and they're getting to learn as well.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And it's, and like I said, it's all about we talked about it being, listening. So I did actually script questions, and we're not even using them. That's the fun thing about it. Because we asked that one question, and based on that first question, based on what your answer is, that leads us through a whole wandering path of conversation. I'm not interviewing you, and I'm definitely not interrogating you. So it is a conversation, but by listening, I figure out what's my next question, or where do we want to go from along the path that we're going on, and not make a quick turn left or right. So really fun. Yeah,
and you know what? The person who's probably best at that right now, and has been for a while, is Mark Maron, who does the WTF podcast. So he started out interviewing, he's a comedian, he started out interviewing other comedians, and then expanded to people in the music business. And he's become so popular, he even interviewed President Obama. And if you listen to his best interviews, I actually think his best interviews are with other comics. But he has this way of making it more of a conversation than an interview, and just, follows the different sort of currents and eddies. If somebody says something that's interesting, he'll ask the follow-up question. And, he does it in a way, because he's not technically a professional interviewer. He does it in a way that's very accessible, that doesn't seem like an interrogation, just like somebody having a coffee and being curious.
Wonderful. That's because we talked before we hit the record button about what is this podcast, and we call it Comm Cafe. It's communications for results. But I said it's like a virtual coffee meeting that instead of going and because it takes a lot of time to drive across the city and sit in traffic, and I do not like traffic. But it's still having that virtual conversation, like you said, about a virtual cup of coffee, and therefore Comm Cafe can become the virtual coffee shop to have that meeting. Now, how do you spell Mark's last name? Because I wrote Mark, and I love
so it's Mark with a C, and Maron, Maron. And if you have a podcast app, all you generally have to do is open the app, and it will probably be one of the top 3 recommended podcasts, because it's hugely, hugely popular. He was one of the first people to get into podcasting. It was funny because he was basically an unemployed comedian, and everybody joked about, oh yeah, well, at least you got the podcast. But it's become hugely popular. I think it's actually by far the top podcast, and it has been so for the past year or two. And it really has helped jumpstart his comedy career. He started doing a television show based on his podcast, and it's been a real game changer for him.
Wonderful. And I didn't even have to plant that seed, because like I said, one of my colleagues, Gordon, so we ran our second workshop on the weekend about the 4 pillars, our Action Think Tank Academy, and how to get started with podcasting. So we had 4 more people out and launching 4 more podcasts in the next week or two, and really showing people how to use podcasting to generate leads. So let me lead that into my next question for you: is how has your podcast benefit your business, what you're doing?
Well, there's been basically 2 things with that. Now, our audience is interesting in that our audience, because my co-host Cindy is in the United States and she has a big following in the U.S., not all of our listeners are people in Toronto, where my primary market is. But what the podcast has really done has allowed people who are interested in working with me, a chance to find out really more about me and about my take on speaking, because speaking is a very personal thing for people. And what I find is a lot of people want to know that the person that they're working with, particularly, I work with a lot of heart-centered, authentic entrepreneurs, and that they don't want somebody who's going to be, kind of the overly slick, I'm so great by my stuff guy. So what I find is when people come to me, the podcast may not be the first thing they hear me on, but it's a secondary source of information where they can really get to know me and who I am and my take on things, which means that when they actually do come to me and we have a sales conversation, they're almost pre-sold. They're at least sort of pre-sold on my personality and that I'm likely the right person for them. So that's one way that there's been results from the podcast. And for myself, the other way is I'm also looking at doing more paid speaking engagements across Canada and the United States. So this is now getting me in front of people who are meeting planners, for instance, because they're also listening to the show because they're a big part of the speaking industry. And that's getting me known. And thirdly, there's the relationships. So now I have relationships with a whole bunch of very well-established speakers all over North America, and they're resources I can now draw upon to, if I'm looking for speaking engagement somewhere, or maybe they have a client or potential client that doesn't work for them, then they can refer them to me. So there's a whole bunch of avenues where the podcast is getting results for me.
Wonderful. Again, that's. We didn't even, somebody would think we're rehearsing these answers, but it's true. Like that is what and that's why I love what I'm doing right now on this side of the business. because it really is helping people to explain to them it's a longer play. It's not like buying ads. It's not like buying a vendor booth, but it's, dollar for dollar. It's better results, I think.
Yeah, and to be perfectly honest, when I started, I thought there would be more direct results. I thought there would be a more direct pipeline to basically releasing an episode and having someone just say, "Oh, I just heard this episode and I want to work with you." But even though it's not always that direct, there's a definite significant value to having that out there. And I'm noticing that now even more so that we've been doing that for a year. So there's a lot more people who know about me. When I'm approaching people who book meetings, often they've heard about me or heard about the podcast. So that just makes everything a little bit easier. And when things are a little bit easier, it means that, deals are done quicker. And then you can get on to the next thing and either make more money or save more time.
Yep. Wonderful. And with the podcast, for example, even though I knew you, I was able to hop over, like the Facebook page, do a quick read on the Facebook page, and then listen to an episode to hear a little bit about your style and format and what you guys are talking about. And then for a high knowledge person, I can do 60 to 70% of my sales cycle myself, so that you are right. By the time I call you up, I'm already sold. I'm ready to do business with you. So that's really cool. All right. Where to go to next? We talked a little bit about systems and tools as a solopreneur, someone who's done that shift from the corporate world and into self-employment, and now moving from self-employment to a solopreneur. And I'm not sure if people know the difference. Self-employment means, if you're not working in your business today, you're not making any money because you don't have things that generate money for you while you sleep. I'm pretty sure you've moved into the solopreneur, that you work for yourself, but you still, I know you've had a couple of different trips on the DL list. Your business didn't stop and collapse while you were out of commission. So maybe share one tool that you use. I may seed the seed about Infusionsoft, maybe. One tool that is, and maybe not even Infusionsoft, but one person, something that someone's getting ready to make the move. What's that one thing that they could help keep them organized?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Infusionsoft is probably the main thing to talk about because by far it's my main tool. To be honest, I like to keep things as simple as possible. And the one thing I do like about Infusionsoft is there's a lot of software, a lot of different types of software within that one package. So for instance, I find, everybody knows of Infusionsoft as sort of an email marketing system, but I find for myself, one of the things I use Infusionsoft most for is the financial side of keeping track of, how many sales I've made, what's the average cost per sale, what payments are coming out, all of that stuff, on the financial side, Infusionsoft makes it very easy for me to keep track of that without me having to have a separate piece of software for that. I can do all of that within Infusionsoft. And that's one of the things that I think, especially financially in business, being very aware of your cash flow is obviously huge. And having a tool that lets you do that, I think, is really important. I think when I started, I was, using basically an Excel spreadsheet, which is fine when we just started in business and you have very few clients. But after a while, you need something a bit more sophisticated, I find.
All right. Wow. You're hitting all the things right on for me today. Now, as a follow-up question to that, now do you tie, because this is I'm putting my accounting hat on, not just my podcasting interviewing hat on. Do you tie a accounting package onto Infusionsoft, or you just use Infusionsoft to generate stuff for your accountant?
Yeah, so I actually have a bookkeeper who does all my books for me monthly, and yeah, he's also my accountant as well. So yeah, I basically use Infusionsoft to keep all of the income part of things together, and then send that information off to him along with whatever expenses that have accrued that month.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I'm using it.
And that's it's sometimes because sometimes we get over like completely down the rabbit hole of trying to make everything be all connected and not involve people. But sometimes it's a little bit easier to say, well, I don't need my customer detail in my accounting system. I need my customer detail in my marketing system. But I'm happy to just say, okay, here's my sales for the month, and send that to my accountant. And he doesn't necessarily need the granular level entered into the accounting system. It's just to say what's the best use of everyone's time and money. You want to track your results, but you don't necessarily need all of that detail in every system. So really cool. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
the accounting side was definitely one of those things that I wanted to delegate as soon as possible in my business, because it can take me hours to collate stuff. And if there's like a couple cents missing somewhere and I'm like, oh, where the heck is that? It just, stresses me out. And it's just like, you know what? I would rather have a professional who knows all the ins and outs of this stuff do that sort of work, and, just be freed up to, look more at my business from a wider point of view of, okay, what are my total income and expenses and percentages of, what am I spending most on, and just more of that top level stuff. I want to think of myself as an executive in my business as opposed to, the person doing the detail work of the accounting, for instance.
That is great advice again, because I know lots of people say, oh, it's how they don't want to spend the money on the accountant. And I don't know if you know Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh used to say, if you want to be a millionaire, anything that you can delegate that's less than $500 and some dollars an hour, that's the hourly rate of the millionaire is $500 an hour. So if you can delegate, I'm pretty sure you can get a pretty excellent bookkeeper / accountant for less than $500 an hour, and therefore but even if your hourly rate's $100 an hour, to delegate, because an hour spent making sales calls, or in your case, doing what only you can do, which is the coaching which is the coaching side. I can't coach for you, Jason, but I can help you crunch a few numbers. And that's where you really figure out where your business partners and business advisors, and you build up your support team, because you are a business owner, and business owners, whether it's employees or partners, requires one or both.
Exactly. And, another little formula that I use, if I'm going to hire somebody to help in my business is, I try and look at, okay, what's going to be the total for the year? So like I look at my accountant, and he basically bills me quarterly. So I sort of look at, okay, how much is that a year? And then I think, okay, how many clients do I need to get to pay for this person? And, if it's, and it generally ends up being like one client. So it's like, okay, considering all of the hours that he frees for me, I should definitely be able to get at least one client, and hopefully a lot more from that. So, that just makes sense. And sometimes for people who maybe aren't in the millionaire category yet, that can be a way for them to look at it.
Yeah, and that is, wow, I am filling up my notepad with tips from you today, Jason. This is great. We need to get together a little bit more often. I know I saw you a couple of weeks ago at Speaker Slam.
That's right, yes.
But we didn't really get into this level but I really like that, the fact that, and people should realize that an accountant is working for you part-time. He's not your full-time person. So you hit the, one, maybe two, max maybe 3 clients pays for your accountant today. If you can't, if your accountant doesn't free up, and he should free up anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a month. If those 10 hours a month, if you can't go and get one new client a month, not even one new client a year, maybe reconsider being in business.
Exactly. Yeah. At that point, if you can't do that, your problem's not necessarily your accounting. It's your marketing and sales.
Yeah. What your offer is. What is your what are you? What's your what solution? What are you the solution to? As they say. All right. Now we didn't even hit any of my other stuff, but that's okay. I think I'll ask you at the end so that people, if they stuck around, they can get a little bit of the. We talked a lot about actually finances and money for two podcasters, but I'm gonna skip the first two questions, and I think you shared a lot with us already, but maybe that one piece of advice around finances, around money. You've given us a ton, so I want to hear the best one, because you just like that. I'd almost book that last one to say, calculate the formula. What's the formula? Because not just for your accountant, but if you outsource your marketing, or if you want to outsource, your social media, or outsource, use that formula to say how much does each thing, when you outsource, how many clients does that represent, and just use it as a way to track. But maybe more around the personal finances, which is my core business as a financial advisor and CFO business advisor. What's that money tip that someone shared with you a long time ago to keep you going in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is just, knowing how much you're spending, keeping an eye on where that money's going out. I mean, most of us have a pretty good idea of what money is coming in, but where is that money going out? And for a lot of people, including, myself at certain times of my life, one of the big things has been interest payments. So, making yourself really aware, how much a month am I paying for interest in credit card debt, because that ends up being the big one. And I've had times where my interest rates, on something like a credit card has gone up significantly without me knowing it. And that's just lost money. I mean, you're not really investing in anything at that point. So just, being really aware of where that money is going, particularly things like interest payments. Really good.
And I know it's, I'll chime in, I'll give you my 2 cents worth on interest. There is good interest, and there's, a lot of bad interest. And you can borrow. So if you're in business, you can borrow to put in capital into your business, in which case it's a business expense. The challenge with that is it requires revenue. So you can have all the expenses in the world that you want, but if you don't all of a sudden, if you don't have the cash flow to fund the loans or to fund the interest payments, I don't care about how many tax deductions you have if you don't have the revenue on the top to support the expenses on the bottom. Eventually, Revenue Canada will come knocking and say, well, you're only allowed so many years of losses. Eventually, you need to you have to be in business to make an income. Yeah.
And one thing that I just thought of as well, when it comes to knowing things about your money, a challenge that I've had previously is, when I was talking about credit card rates going up, that happened to me once. And then I realized what happened was they had gotten some information from the credit reporting companies. So whether it was Equifax or TransUnion. So I checked my credit score, and I found out that there was a whole bunch of payments on there, things like past mortgages and car payments, that I was still listed as debts that I was still paying, that I had long paid off. And if I hadn't become aware of that, I would have been, going around with this terrible credit rating. And then if I went to get a loan or something, it would have been declined. So, being very aware of and checking your credit rating, I think is a big thing too, because sometimes they get stuff wrong.
That's what I did. I remember seeing your post on Facebook about a month ago about that. And that's wonderful, because I know, again, as a financial advisor, there's a few things that when we first meet, in that introductory meeting, we ask, and really it's just a conversation with people just to figure out, okay, where are they currently, and what level of knowledge does someone have? And, the first thing we usually ask is, do you have a will? And along that, we don't really get into it, but I may add that to say, just are you aware of what your credit score is? And have you checked it on an annual basis? Because you're right, with identity theft and fraud and a number of different things, there's multiple reasons why, and it takes a while to get it fixed. Like if there's an error, especially if you're about to buy a house and these days banks are tightening up the financing, that you don't want all of a sudden your house not to close on the day it's supposed to close because the bank decided to do one last check on your credit score, and you have something there that doesn't belong, and you miss out on your dream house because you didn't check your credit score, which is a free service to do on an annual basis. Don't do it every month because you don't want too many hits on your credit score, but check in at least pick an anniversary date once a year and just do a quick inquiry. It can definitely pay for itself because it's free by just getting a little bit lower interest on your next loan or credit card. Is pay yourself, not the bank.
It's a small thing, but it's important.
Wonderful. Okay. That is a good chunk. Yeah, we've been chatting for a while. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but maybe to share with the listeners where they can find you. Name of the podcast and what's the website, or the best way that someone can reach out to Jason Reid. If you've heard a little bit about what he has to say today and you like the sound of what he does, I'm sure they can definitely get to your podcast. And where else can they find you?
Yeah, so the podcast is called the Speaking for Profit Podcast, which is at speakingforprofitpodcast.com, or obviously it's on iTunes as well, if you want to do that search. And to find me specifically, my website is Power Story Master, all one word, powerstorymaster.com. And if you want to reach me by email, just add my name, Jason, in front of that. So Jason at powerstorymaster.com, and you can get right to me.
Wonderful. And like I said, as a little tip for anyone who's doing podcasting, if you want to have guests on your show, give them a time to share a little bit about what they do and where they can be reached, because that's part of it. It's you gave my listeners some great content about stuff that I do, and why wouldn't they want to hear a little bit more about what you do? Because even if people don't want to be a big speak from stage, speak to sell, I'm sure being able to be a good storyteller or doing the other side of your coaching, there's other ways to leverage that as a skill. So wonderful. Okay, thank you, Jason. I'm just going to go on to a quick little wrap up here, and just to tell listeners, so thank them for stopping by again to Comm Cafe today. If you've liked what you've heard, drop us a comment, or hey, why not subscribe on iTunes or here also at My Podcast World, and stop by iTunes and give us a rating about how much you liked both my interview, my ability to interview, or more so how much you liked my guest, Jason Reid, and all of the great content he shared with you today for free. The advantages of having a podcast and listening to podcasts is you can get a lot of great content and find out, like Jason said, you can find yourself your next coach by listening to the podcast to see who is it that you really like, and then call them up, reach out to them, and the importance of having a good coach. Okay, that has been the Comm Cafe for today, and join us on the next episode.